Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, and share buttons. Well, what's causing the panic? And many of you might say, well, what panic? What are you talking about? I don't see anybody panicking. There's no headlines about panic, or at least maybe there isn't when I'm recording this. Let me put it that right. There's no headlines out there, but maybe there will be once this video actually gets released. So you might be saying, well, there's no panic. Nobody's panicking. But I assure you, there is absolute panic. And that panic is taking place with Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve Board of the United States, and central bankers all over the world. Why are they in a panic? Well, because they know something has happened that could potentially bring down the entire global financial system. So I want to turn your attention to this article right here. This was from Zero Hedge on Sunday. It's titled, "There's Something Happening Here." And if you remember, last week the Federal Reserve came out and they made comments about how rate cuts were coming in 2024. So we've heard for 2 years now about rates higher for longer, and inflation is going to be brought to an end, and we're focused on getting rid of inflation, and rates are not coming down anytime soon. Then all of a sudden we got a complete 180 about face. So let's look at this section of this article, which gives us a glimpse into how quick this about face was, because here we had Fed comments on November 1st saying, well, getting inflation to 2% has a long way to go. And then on the 21st, they said no indication of rate cuts at the last meeting. We didn't even talk about it, right? It's not going to happen. Then December 1st, talk about rate cuts are premature. We're prepared to tighten policy further if needed. It's not going to happen. That's what they claimed and claimed and claimed and claimed. And then all of a sudden, so 12 days later, on December 13th, they come out, well, rates have peaked and 3 rate cuts are coming in 2024. And then, of course, the market took off and they tried to do an about face and said, oh, no, we're not really talking about that. But too late. You already released all the data, said you were. And, of course, all of this is just theater anyway. It's propaganda that they're putting out there, trying to manipulate the markets through their words. But why did we see this 180-degree pivot between December 1st and December 13th? What could possibly happen in 12 days that would make them do this about face? Now, there's been much speculation. One of those speculations is, well, the White House, the Biden administration, wants rate cuts to juice the economy up, juice the stock market before their re-election efforts at the end of 2024. And while it's true that there are people within that administration that are probably pushing for that, the idea that they haven't been pushing for that, and then all of a sudden, Jerome Powell caved, right, in this 12-day period, I don't find that to be an adequate explanation. I think something else is taking place, especially when you figure, whether the Biden administration knows it or not, I'm sure the Fed knows, changing their policy stance right now will have no impact in a positive way for the Biden administration, because all it's going to do is create more inflation. That's what it's supposed to do, and that's one of the primary problems that the Biden administration faces, is rampant inflation. Even with people who voted for Biden are looking around and saying, how can I afford my groceries? How can I afford my rent? So the idea that more inflation is going to somehow benefit Biden's re-election efforts, I find really far-fetched. So something else took place to change this policy stance from December 1st to December 13th, where you're saying rates are where they're at and we're not going to cut them, to, oh, yep, we're going to cut them a whole bunch of times in the coming year, right? So what happened? Well, we get a glimpse visually here as we scroll down in the article. So let's make this bigger. Well, it's that the banking system is insolvent. And we've talked about this numerous times. I wish that this had the full chart going back to show us 2008, 2009, so we could see how the great financial crisis compares to today. But if it did have that, what you would see is more akin to what we see right here versus right here. What we saw in the great financial crisis had nothing like this in terms of unrealized banks or unrealized losses on bank balance sheets. So what this means is we're at $700 billion that banks are underwater on these assets, which means if their depositors, just a small percentage of some of these banks' depositors showed up and said, I want my cash, they don't have it. And guys, that's what happened back in March of this year at Silicon Valley Bank, at Signature Bank, at First Republic Bank. We saw it at Credit Suisse, which was, or Credit Suisse, however you choose to pronounce that. It was a global, systemically important bank that if it had failed, would have caused a huge chain reaction, a financial contagion throughout the global financial system, and basically blown the whole thing up. So they managed to paper over that at the time, and one of the ways that they did that was by creating this bank term funding program. And we looked at this. This didn't exist. So if we go back and we look at the max chart, there was no bank term funding program for all of history until March. So they created this thing in March. And this means basically these banks, they took these unrealized losses. So these bonds that they were holding, it's mostly government debt, U.S. government debt that they're holding. When the interest rates went up, the value of those bonds went down, meaning if they were forced to sell them, say when depositors showed up and said, give me my cash, then they're selling them at a loss. That's why they call them unrealized losses. They haven't been realized yet because they haven't sold those yet. But if they're forced to, they'll realize them, and that's the end. And so the Federal Reserve came along and said, well, just send those over to us and we'll give you face value for them. And you can pay us back next year, right? So this is a temporary, another one of those temporary government programs, a temporary 12-month program where they could do this. And, oh, okay, it worked. Everybody got bailed out. Everything leveled off by the summer. Everything's fine again. And then all of a sudden, we went over this in a previous video, all of a sudden it's back in use again. And so what happened between December 1st and December 13? Well, when we look at this chart, we see on November 29th, 113.8 billion had been used as part of this program, had been borrowed by the banking system. And so December 1st was just 2 days later, but then on the 13th, when Powell makes his about face comments, that's up to 223.7 billion. So I'm just shy of $10 billion in that 2-week period in additional lending. And we have yet to see what's been borrowed in the time since then. Where does it stand? And so what could possibly be going on that caused that about face? Well, it could be that something is broken within the financial system. And you and I haven't heard about it yet. We'll be the last ones to find out. If you remember last year, we looked at that FDIC meeting where they wargamed all this stuff out. Oh, we have a message for our hedge fund buddies and Wall Street. And then we've got a message for the general public, right? We don't want them to get too excited now, right? Because we want them to have faith in everything, faith in the banking system. You and I don't have that faith. That's what they said, and they all laughed about it. But we want the general public to have that faith. So guys, something has broken. Well, maybe we'll find out about it later, maybe not. But it's It's coming to a head. What could that something be? Well, we can speculate that maybe it has something to do with this. We looked at this before. This is from back in October. Glitch at Japan's clearing system prevents transfers at 11 banks. So basically the Japanese banking system sort of froze up back in October, but it was just a glitch, guys. It was just a glitch. Nothing to see here. You know, nothing, no problems at all. It was just a glitch. But then let's take a look at this article right here from Wall Street on Parade, where it says the New York Fed has extended its $500 billion bailout facility to a sprawling Japanese bank you've never heard of. So maybe this has something to do with Powell's about face. It says, quietly on December 1st, the New York Fed published the following statement on its website. The Norinchukin Bank, New York branch, has been added to the list of standing repo facility counterparties effective December 1st, 2023. You know, we look at that and go, I don't really know what that means, but let's hang in there and we'll get a little bit more insight into this. It says the standing repo facility is a permanent $500 billion bailout facility created by the Federal Reserve and operated by the New York Fed, the private regional Fed bank where multi-trillion-dollar Wall Street bank bailouts have become a regular feature of its operations. So guys, for those that don't know, the Federal Reserve is not the federal government. It is a private institution owned by the banks that somehow Congress decided to put in charge of the currency supply of the United States a little over 100 years ago. And so it operates for the benefit of the banks. And this is why we see all of these bailouts during times of crisis, and everybody gets upset about it. But this is the system that has been created and put in place. And so what is this standing repo facility? If we go to the Federal Reserve's website, we can read that it was created in July 2021. So basically to bail out the banking system. Again, it's another one of these programs to bail out the banks. But it's for domestic purposes. This is for domestic banks, not Japanese banks. So what is going on here? Let's read on. It says, without any action from the U.S. legislative branch, otherwise known as Congress, the Fed has unilaterally decided to become lender of last resort to Wall Street trading houses, whom they prefer to call primary dealers, and deposit-taking banks, including the uninsured New York branches of foreign banks like Norinchukin Bank. If you've never heard of Norinchukin Bank, don't feel badly. Neither have we, and we've been monitoring global banks for decades. According to the bank's financial statement for its fiscal year ending March 31st, it had $708 billion in assets. If it were a U.S. bank, it would be the fifth largest by assets, just behind JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and Citibank. So this is one of the largest banks in the world by assets, so it would be considered a global, systemically important bank. If it were to fail, again, the repercussions for that toward all the other financial institutions in the world would be disastrous. And there's quadrillions of dollars of derivatives that have been created. This is a big house of cards. And if a card gets knocked over, the whole thing falls down. And this is one of those cards. So it says the notice from the New York Fed about adding Norinchukin Bank to its bailout facility grabbed our attention for two reasons. First, it came out on a Friday. What have I been saying for years? They release this stuff on Friday when nobody's paying attention. And then, it's old news by the time somebody pays attention on Monday. Says, which is typically when financial entities dump bad news they hope will disappear over the weekend. And also because the standing repo facility was the successor to the trillions, with a T, trillions of dollars and still unexplained emergency repo loans the Fed had to pump into Wall Street in the fourth quarter of 2019. How many of you out there know that trillions of dollars were given to Wall Street banks at the end of 2019? I don't think that news really even came out in public until about a year ago, a little over a year ago. So they managed to hide this. At the time, people knew there were problems in the financial markets and they were pointing it out. And then, well, lo and behold, it just so happened that what a stroke of luck. It's sort of like one of those coincidences, like the glitch. We had a global pandemic that was the perfect excuse for the central banks just printing and bailing out and doing everything they could to prop up the financial system, right? And it worked out great because instead of having to say, hey, we bailed out all these rich bankers, they got to say, oh, we're protecting people who, from this virus and the shutdowns, right? So it just worked out, happened to work out just right. It says, as indicated in the chart below, a unit of another Japanese bank, Nomura, was the largest recipient of Fed bailout largesse in the last quarter of 2019. Nomura borrowed $3.7 trillion under the Fed's emergency repo loan program, topping the amount borrowed by JP Morgan Chase by $1.11 trillion. The loan amounts on the chart come directly from the emergency repo loan data released quarterly by the New York Fed. So here's this chart showing this is just from October 1st, 2019 to the end of the year 2019. What these banks borrowed from the Fed, and yet most of the world didn't know it at the time and still doesn't know it even today because, oh, that's old news, right? Yeah, we covered it up at the time, but then we told people quietly on a Friday a year or so ago and nobody raised a fuss, so everything must be fine, right? So let's read on just a little bit, and this will give us maybe some insight into what's happening now. It says the Fed swung into emergency mode on September 17th, 2019, when the rate on these loans suddenly spiked from 2.25% to as high as 10%, just overnight, strongly suggesting that Wall Street banks were backing away from questionable borrowers. Guys, they're not talking about you and me when they say questionable borrowers. They're talking about other financial institutions. So this is what we saw happen after the failure of Lehman Brothers. Everybody wonders who is bankrupt. Are they insolvent? Are they bankrupt? Well, I don't want to lend them anything today that I find out tomorrow they're not going to pay back. So all the lending freezes up. The credit markets freeze up. It's what we've been warning about. It says the Fed set up its own repo facility to make tens of billions of dollars in loans available to trading houses on Wall Street on a daily basis, and at very cheap interest rates that did not reflect the credit risk of the individual trading houses. It says the Fed hadn't made these emergency repo loans since the financial crisis of 2008. So guys, are we seeing something similar happening right now? I think we can piece these things together and say it's highly probable the answer is yes, something has broken. And they don't want to tell us that because, again, you go back and you watch that FDIC meeting where they're wargaming. Well, we don't need the public to get all upset. If they came out and told us, hey, we made this about face on our Fed policies because it looks like the entire global banking system is about to blow up. If they came out and said that stuff, everybody would run out to the bank and withdraw all their cash. And then the whole system would blow up. They know that, so they're not going to say that. They're going to try to kick the can down the road, as they've managed to do several times in the past. But at some point, it blows up. They're going to try as long as they can to hold the system together. And I know it sounds counterintuitive, because the system in place now that's been in place for decades gives these people power. And when the system falls apart, which it must mathematically do, there's a potential they could lose that power. That's why they're putting into place solutions, right? They call them solutions. They're putting into place what they believe will be the next system to take over so that they can cement their power. So we know they're going to use this. They're going to, when the banking crisis comes, when the global financial system melts down, the solution in all likelihood is going to be central bank digital currencies. They're going to use that opportunity, that crisis, to push central bank digital currencies on the entire world. No doubt about it. But they want to, they're not in a hurry to get to that day. They want to make sure they're prepared for it. And again, in the meantime, this system gives them power. So if they can keep it going for a little bit longer, they're going to keep it going for as long as they can. But they know that it has a certain shelf life, and we're at the end of that shelf life. So they're going to try to hold it off, but it gets to a point where they just can't. And once they can't, then they'll just let it run, do its damage, and then they'll use all of these things that they've put in place, such as bank bail-in legislation and security entitlements that mean you don't really own the stocks in your brokerage account, all of these things to steal from us and to set up the next system. Oh, you can have it all back. We'll make you whole again but it's going to be in the central bank digital currency. But don't worry. With this, we'll be able to prevent a future scenario like this. We'll be able to see these things happening ahead of time. We'll be able to prevent it, and the central bank can't go bankrupt. So you're in good shape. This is the solution. This is the answer. So we're approaching that time. They've continued to try to push this back. At some point, they won't be able to. I think something has happened here between December 1st and December 13th that caused this about face. I do not believe it was political pressure from the White House, as we've seen speculated on. It could be. I find that very doubtful. What's most likely? What's highly probable that after a year of mounting pressure from the White House, they finally caved in this 12-day window? Or something broke within that 12-day window, and they know it, but we don't know it yet. And if they lose control of it, well, that's when we'll find out about it, but it'll be too late. If they manage to gain control over it for a time, it may be way down the road, if we ever find out about it. But guys, I think that's most likely. We've talked about these glitches aren't coincidence. Right? Everything's a glitch or a ransomware attack, or why is this happening? We don't know. But guys, something just doesn't smell right. Something isn't going right. I believe that this is panic on the part of the Fed because they're realizing that they may be at a point where they've lost complete control, and they're afraid that the public is going to figure that out in the very near future. So, I don't know. What do you think? Leave your comments below. Make sure to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons. God willing, I will see you next time. Bye. If you want to learn more about the end times and Bible prophecy, make sure to sign up for my free monthly newsletter and get your copy of my free ebook, 7 Signs of the End Times. Just follow the link in the description to get your free book. Also, make sure to check out all of my books. Just look up Britt on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Google Books, Kobo, or anywhere books are sold. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.